Looking forward to spending the next hour with Mark and Joel to talk about refurbishment and reinstatement. We know it's a very hot topic around the country for a number of you, getting your head around what to do, what not to do, decision-making processes. And as we want to present today, really about best practice. So while I'm talking, I'm actually going to take a moment to share my screen to kick us off. And here's one we prepared earlier. The host has asked me to start my video. Sure, why not? All right, I'm assuming everyone can see the slides. Tash, give me a thumbs up because I can see you. Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, so the reason we want to focus on this as a topic is a couple of reasons. As we make our way around the country for all of our events and we collect feedback from you all, refurbishment and reinstatement is often one of the top topics that you're always hungry for more information on. And the way we wanted to approach it today was not really to go into the legal do's and don'ts. We can touch on that a little bit, but really talk about what best practice looks like, because at the end of the day, what we believe is that success when it comes to getting units market ready or market competitive, as we'll differentiate the term shortly, comes down to how you view the entire asset that you're responsible for. So not just one unit, but all units, not just all units, but the entire community. So getting it right is important. It helps us manage the risk around vacancy, helps us create asset value, which is important to the wider business, especially as we get older sites and we want to start seeing reinvestment in them. That asset value becomes important. It's important to buyer expectations, but more importantly, our own competitiveness in the marketplace. When some of these communities were established 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were probably the only retirement village in town. Now there's a lot more competition in the marketplace. And when you consider some of them have been spec'd to very high end, you might not have that luxury, but it doesn't mean your unit can't compete against them for price and other reasons. And as we look around the country, we can see that retirement villages are an aging stock. I think the average age of villages now is about 30 years of age when you look across the 2,500 retirement villages. Older stock also means keeping it relevant, because today we've got buyback obligations, which we didn't have 7 or 8 years ago. So now as you look across every state in the country, there's a buyback obligation in place in each state jurisdiction. The details of it vary, but it means that if a unit remains unsold, the operator is obliged to pay out the exit entitlement of the outgoing resident. And that's cash out the door, when what we need to be doing from a professional lens is always looking at all things to be bringing cash in the door and supporting that. We also need to keep the units ready for market to move away from having longer sales period. Thankfully, the supply-demand economics are in our favour. And as we talk to operators around the country, they're telling us that they are using the term structurally full, which means 94 to 96% occupied, with that 4% vacancy, a combination of exiting residents, units that are empty being reinstated or refurbished, or more importantly, exited with a buyer set to move in, which is a good place to be in. The sector hasn't always been that way, so it's important that we don't get complacent because times are good. We'll touch on rising construction costs with Joel a little bit later on, but also increasing buyer expectations. There's some questions I'm going to be putting to Mark when we get to the Q&A, just around how that's informing the decisions that he's making for his portfolio over there at Calvary. If you just look at it by way of the numbers, so we've just taken this to say, for a typical unit valued at about $650,000, if it's empty for 6 months, it's costing us $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 for a 6-month period. For 12 months, obviously escalates quite an amount, and same when you get to that 18-month figure. And this doesn't account for the unrealised DMF by not having someone in the unit. So empty units isn't just an expensive business in the sense of, do I do carpet and paint versus gut the whole thing and start again? It's an expensive decision in the sense that getting the decision wrong means you've got vacant stock, and vacant stock is costing the business money in the short to medium term. And that doesn't even account for the exit entitlement payout when you get to those 12 to 18-month figures that you could be on the hook for around the country. So we really see it as, a vacant unit becomes an asset performance decision. And that's something that, as we look at the sector through our lens as village professionals, we need to be understanding how those decisions are made so that we ourselves can be influencing and shaping good decisions being made in our business on a daily basis. The two terms that we use when we talk refurb and reinstatement as market ready and market competitive, and they are slightly different. For years, I've used the term market ready, and that's having a clean, functional, saleable unit that meets minimum expectations. I think we'd all agree, yeah, that's market ready. It means if a unit ticks those 4 boxes there, it can be on the market, someone can buy it, and someone can move into it tomorrow. The market competitive term I actually stole from Joel after a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. And it was about saying sometimes it's not just getting it clean, functional, and saleable, but it's about making the unit attractive, contemporary, and desirable so that it exceeds buyer expectations. And again, we'll unpack that a little bit further, but it also shows the way the market's trending. Just having a unit that's livable might not always cut it, and we have to have a unit that is, desirable, so that people can aspire to live in those homes. And that last little point there, a unit can be market ready and still sit vacant. And that's where understanding your competition and what you're up against in the wider marketplace becomes a very important thing. So the decisions that we have to make then every time a unit is vacated is, do we reinstate, do we refurbish, or do we go into a full reconfiguration mode, which we'll unpack over the course of the hour. Reinstatement is that minimum requirement we have just to restore the unit to its original standard, address any damage. It's very contract driven and it's very mandatory. Refurbishment is that next level. You're pulling out carpet, you're replacing bench tops, you're replacing bathrooms, kitchens, and those sorts of things. It's driven by the market. And quite often it can be seen as discretionary, but it can be a discretionary spend that has a lot of upside when you consider higher sales prices, lower days on market, and increased desirability of that unit and bringing fresh residents in. The term that we're hearing a lot more of, though, is reconfiguration. So coming back to, as I said at the start, the majority of units are 30 years old now as you look around the country. So do they functionally work for today's customer? I'm going to put a little asterisk with that one there around today's customer, in the sense that one of the big conversations we have with you all around the country is, how is care changing the landscape of retirement living? How are we helping, enabling, or encouraging residents to age in place? And if that's the future of our product and the future of our market, this reconfiguration conversation becomes extremely important. And again, we'll discuss that a little bit later in the panel. So we come into a decision framework every time a unit becomes available. What are the asset factors? What are the market factors, the financial factors, and strategic factors? How long's someone been in the unit? What's its current condition? Have there been any previous upgrades? These are all the things that we're considering when we walk into the unit, just in the physical environment. What's going on around us? Competing villages, competing apartments. We've been writing a bit later that retirement villages are now competing with residential apartments in some parts of the country. That means they're competing with us as well. So how do we compare when we put our units up against those? Then obviously we've got the financial side. What's going to be our ROI based on what we invest? And then more importantly, strategically, how does this decision on one unit impact on how we're shaping the village's position in the wider marketplace? Are we happy with the price point that we're at, or do we see the opportunity to really drive the strategic direction of this community forward? So then we're not making a decision on one unit. We might be making a decision on 10 to 15 units, knowing that that's going to be our turnover over a 12-month period. So really taking longer-term considerations through our models. And so then with every unit, we're looking at, can the unit sell quickly without intervention? If it's yes, reinstatement. And that's going to fit for most units that are under 10 years old. Anything longer than that, the answer is most likely going to be no. So we have to look at what are we doing around refurbishing the unit, or reassessing the ROI, which might need some significant capital spent on it to get it market ready. These are just some questions there that I typically ask myself every time I looked at a unit. I know these are the sorts of questions that Mark asks of his portfolio, and they're probably questions that Jolin's having with his clients every time he goes into a community. Decision-making pitfalls is important to note as well. While it's great to have scope of works and standard fit-outs and fixtures, doing every unit the same for 3 or 4 years' time can look a bit stale. So we can talk about pitfalls as we go through it. Understanding expectations. It's not always about chasing the lowest construction cost. And I am going to ask Jolin to talk about that a little bit later on, because sometimes people think, oh, it's about the race to the bottom. It's not. It's actually looking at value for money, but more importantly, looking at your return on investment. Sometimes spending an extra $5,000 can create $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of value. And I know that in the lead up to this call, Mark and I have had some great conversations about some of the things he's done in Calgary in that space as well. And documented decision making becomes important as well, which we'll discuss. So we can't have this topic without talking a little bit about the law. I don't want this to be a legal topic, but we do need to be mindful at all times of what the Act says, what the codes say, what the contracts with residents say, and wider village rules. The legislation and contracts define what we must do, but having a longer term lens really allows us to unlock what we should be doing to keep the village competitive, the units attractive, and the villages that we look after thriving. So I really hope that as you go through this conversation with us for what we've got left of the 50 minutes, really be trying to take away reinstatement, refurbishment, how one restores and one competes. But the most important thing we need to be having in our role as village professionals is a really strong asset management lens. So we're looking at all the levers we can be pulling together as once to maximise value for today's residents, for tomorrow's residents, but also the operator as well, who's going to be sinking the capital into these units when the time comes. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite Joel now to come and present. The CEO of Good Constructions. He's a fountain of information when it comes to best practice on the ground. And I'm sure a number of you will be really keen to hear what he has to say, not just over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes with his presentation, but over the course of the conversation. And I know that from our presentation with Joel on the other day, he's already had a number of people that were on this webinar we did on Tuesday, reach out to him to have a more detailed conversation of how we can help. So Joel, I'm going to hand over to you to run through the best practice lens from the contractor perspective. So over to you.